Hi everybody. Okay, so this is our final video in our series of 20th century dictators. So far we've had a look at Mussolini of Italy, Stalin in Russia, Hitler in Germany, and Franco in Spain. So this time we're going to head out of Europe and we're going to be having a look at General Mao in China. Okay, so this is the last one. If you haven't watched the other ones, then obviously feel free to go back and watch those. If you are not interested in those and you just want to watch this video, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to start again with the introduction to what a dictatorship is compared to a democracy. So if you've watched that already, feel free to skip forward just about half a minute or so onto the stuff about General Mao. So let's get started then. I'll just share my screen. So type of government, a democracy is what we have today, and people have a say. Oh, sorry, that should be on highlights and not pen. People have a say in how their country is governed. They vote in elections and they have parties to choose from. They're represented by Parliament and they have a number of freedoms or rights. So freedom of speech, information, belief, law, association, and they have control over their own lives. The opposite is true of a dictatorship, where a person totally controls everybody else and normally uses weapons. So people have no say in how their country is run. There are no elections, and it's run by one party or man. There's very few freedoms, so none of those freedoms that we spoke about in a democracy. So a dictatorship is very, very controlled by the government, and it's a society of oppression. Okay, so where people don't have control over their own lives. So let's have a look then at how Mao came to power and a little bit about his background. So stage one, he was the son of a peasant farmer. Now we've spoken before about how dictatorships often come when people are poor, and he was born in Chaoshan in China in 1893. He went to school till he was 13, so he has some education, which is worth noting, but he may have felt like he wanted more, or maybe he wanted to go and work practically. He served in the Nationalist Revolutionary Army. Now, again, we pointed this out with Franco. A recurring thing is association with the army, because this is where a lot of dictators get their support from. During the 1911 Chinese Revolution, which overthrew the monarchy in 1912. So again, this is something that we've got that's happened now in all of our dictatorships. Actually, we've seen how Mussolini overthrew a dictatorship, not Stalin, but Lenin in Russia. We've got the Russian Revolution, so Stalin comes out of an overthrowing of the monarchy, Hitler as well, and Franco. So it's something that we've got in common throughout all of our dictators. He then qualified as a teacher and he travelled to Beijing, where he worked as a library assistant. So quite a drastic change there. And here he became interested in the works of Karl Marx, who I did mention in the Stalin video. So again, we've got communism here. So remember, or if you didn't watch the Stalin video, communism is the idea where everybody in society is equal. So whether you are the owner of a company or you work as a cleaner, everybody would get the same amount of money. Everything is centralized. All infrastructure, railways, banks, everything is owned by the government and then shared out between the people. And Karl Marx was the person who wrote the Communist Manifesto. So in 1921, Mao was a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party, which was inspired by the 1917 Russian Revolution led by Lenin, which I talked about in the Stalin video. So again, going back to this idea of him being poor and why that would make him interested in communism, because everybody's equal in a communist society, we tend to get communism when people are poor. So if you've got the rich people in a capitalist society and the poor people, what communism does is this: it brings them equal. So the rich will not want communism, but the poor will. So if there's more poor people, then society is going to go like this, and communism is going to be a lot more popular. So the Communist Party then broke away from the nationalists, who they previously fought alongside. Mao led the Red Army of peasants, so again, the ones who would support communism, the ones who would want it, to form the Soviet Republic of China. And by 1934, 10 provinces were under his communist control. So he heads west along the mountains, leading the Long March. 100,000 people took part, and between 10 and 30,000 died. They marched 8,000 miles, and Mao told stories along the way, and he became a hero, and this started his cult of personality. So this idea, this image of him as the savior, okay, the leader of the people in the country. So in 1937, we've got a war between China and Japan. So it's a period of lots of turmoil here. The Manchurian crisis, after the Manchurian crisis had happened in 1931, we've got a war between China and Japan. And Mao's Red Army worked with the nationalists to defeat Japanese forces in 1945. So he's seen as a hero here, and he's got a strong position. Then we've got a Chinese civil war in 45 to 49. Mao's Red Army are victorious, and he announced the People's Republic of China. And we then have in Mao a communist dictator. Okay, so that's how he came to power. And now we will have a look at what life was like in Mao's China. So these are some of our keywords that you might come across in here. So the Great Leap Forward, a strategy to try and improve the economy, which is every leader's goal, really. Cultural Revolution in 1966. So to try and spread communism, and again, commonality here, to remove opposition, to give Mao's regime a communist boost. The Little Red Book, which was written by Mao with his ideologies and ideas, and communes, which were collective farms where lots of family lived, so up to 75,000 people. Okay, so his early reforms then: land reform. He became chairman of the People's Republic of China. So when he became dictators, he redistributed land to the peasantry. So remember, he came from a peasant farm, so he's going to try and work for them. Old landlords were beaten and sometimes killed. The government didn't stop that, so better off peasants are allowed to keep their land, and encourages peasants themselves to kill the landlords who would oppress them. So obviously we can see a lot here, a lot of influence here from Mao's upbringing, okay, and what had happened in his life. So between 200,000 and 5 million were killed, and again, more were sent to reform through labour camps, so similar to what we've seen in Nazi Germany and in communist Russia. Okay, so he promised all citizens freedoms, including freedom of speech, thought, assembly, movement, and religious belief. Women were given the right to vote. Greater educational opportunities and arranged marriages were banned. So this is actually, you could argue, quite positive compared to what we've seen in dictatorship so far for the people of China who were on the right side of this revolution. So Mao was worried about literacy and also about Western influence in education. He made primary education more accessible, and universities are remodelled. We've got improving the health of the population, and death rates gradually decline. So they're positives of Mao's dictatorship. However, 40 to 65 million died under Mao's regime. That's a massive, massive amount of people. If we think about that in terms of, in comparison to, but I don't want a direct comparison here because they aren't the same thing. That 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. So if we put that into perspective, because when we study Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, rightly so, we see that as a massive amount of people, that 6 million, which it is. But if you do cross-reference that with Mao's 40 to 65 million, it's a massive amount of people who've died. He's got a zero tolerance approach to opposition, so absolutely no opposition in this dictatorship. So the forced labour camps were established for Mao's opponents, and there are approximately 1,000 of those throughout China. And in 30 years, it's estimated that 50 million people were sent to these camps, where around 20 million died. So terrifying accounts. So children thrown into the river with their hands tied for stealing potatoes, being forced to work in winter naked, being branded, set on fire, having nose and ears cut off, etc. Again, at any point, please feel free to pause this and read it in your own time. So people in 80% of towns being deliberately kept away from food if they were seen as being a waste of space. He's destroyed a lot of China's traditional culture and heritage. Red Guards roamed the street, rounding up enemies. Professors were targeted and deliberately humiliated. So the reason that obviously dictators want to get rid of political opponents is because they are afraid of competition. So it is about retaining total power and total control. So again, this cult of personality. So let's have a look at the keywords here. So supreme, great, and great. So this idea of him being the savior again. Badges, we've got quotes, we've got dances, all of this bigging up of his personality. So the Great Leap Forward: improve agricultural and industrial production in China. So again, we've got these communes where up to 75,000 people lived, and each family had a share of the profits, but it actually didn't work and led to a great famine in China. So we did have a great famine, so there wasn't enough food for the population. So this is why the people who were deemed a waste of space were not given food. 30 to 40 million died in 2 years, and 50% of some villages died from hunger, and some people resorted to cannibalism. So as we said in Spain, where they didn't talk about the Spanish Civil War, this remains a taboo in China. So rather than calling it the Great Famine, they don't refer to it directly as that, because it is a period of shame in their country. And then finally, propaganda. We've got propaganda everywhere. So we've got slogans, we've got quotes, we've got newspapers again, like we've seen in the other countries. We've got artists and different artworks. Schools, universities, churches were closed and some destroyed, and street signs being pulled down that belong to the old regime. So again, really focusing here on anything that is against what this government is trying to put forward. So it says here, when we're looking at the social reform, that it promised all citizens freedoms, including freedom of speech, thought, assembly, movement, and religious belief. But actually, that's not true, is it? Because if they had freedom of thought and speech, they would have the freedom to criticize the government, which they do not. So he may say that, and it may sound great, but in reality, that isn't the case. So there is the end of our series of 20th century dictators. I hope you've enjoyed it. If this is your first video that you've watched, please feel free to go back and watch the ones on the other 4 dictators. And again, please do have a look at anything else that if any of them particularly have sparked your interest. There's loads of resources there on all of them, some really good films, some really good articles and books as well. So thank you for tuning in to these videos, and I may see you in another series about another topic. Thanks, guys.